So we are, well, I don't know if we're ready quite for that, but it's fine.
Should I click on some of these links? Let's see.
I think these are like, yeah, how to share it.
Select share sound. Bottom left, I did. Okay, let me try that. They're probably experts at this. It says hold control. Maybe I have to do that. Yeah, I think we've done most of them. Okay. All right. I'm going to just check with Karen and we'll just go ahead. Hang on 1 minute.
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right. Maybe we might have an idea.
Zoom automatically turns off your audio.
Okay.
What happens when you connect with Zoom? It turns your mic on, but it turns off any audio from the video clips.
Okay.
So when you're ready to play it, you'll go into your audio settings up here.
All right. Hang on. So when
share screen.
So I'm going to do share screen.
And there should be an audio setting.
All right.
So let's see. Audio.
Is it mute, the mute button?
Hi, Kate, I'm with Joanne and we're trying to find that audio button.
So
okay, I'm actually in the middle of the show.
I'm sorry. Okie dokie. All right, so it should just I think that's it, Joanne. So your microphone is on now, but it should be, it says leave computer audio settings. Oh, go to audio settings.
We did that.
Okay. And she said, when you go to the video, you're going to have to turn off your mic and turn on the video.
So
your mic is on now.
Right.
And then that's just your volume. Yeah. Well, Kate, we're going to have to muddle through this.
Okay.
Otherwise, maybe can they run the slide deck? They have it. Or no?
No, that's good. We'll be good.
All right. Bye.
All right.
Okay.
We're going.
All right. Thank you so much for the flexibility. I think, you'll describe the video to us and we will work through it. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Conroy to our MacLean 41st annual Gender Equity and Ethics lecture series. Thankful for all the attendees and for Dr. presenting today. I'll give this at the end and also at the beginning. We're starting back into our winter series. We had 10 speakers in the fall that were excellent. We're going to have 9 to 10 coming up in the winter. The next one next week being our internal speaker, Dr. Peak. So join us on Wednesdays at noon for this series. But right now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Conroy, who's joining us from Dartmouth. So Dr. Conroy is the Chief Executive Officer and President of Dartmouth Health. She's led Dartmouth Health as the Chief Executive Officer since 2017, overseeing the management of the state's only academic health system and the largest private employer in a complex and rapidly evolving healthcare landscape. Under Dr. Conroy's leadership, the system's flagship hospital, Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, is regularly ranked as the #1 hospital in New Hampshire by the U.S. News and World Report. Dr. Conroy has also moved Dartmouth Health to continue broadening its services to New Hampshire and Vermont communities through partnerships and collaborations in both states. The Dartmouth Health System now includes 4 hospitals and a home health agency and a long-standing strong relationship to Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth. Continues to provide key academic and research collaborations to train the next generation of physicians. Dr. Conroy has long been a vocal advocate for increasing the role of women in leadership and is often singled out as a role model for other women who aspire to become leaders and agents for positive change in healthcare. Dr. Conroy received her undergraduate degree in chemistry from Dartmouth College and earned her medical degree at the Medical University of South Carolina, and she is board certified with the American Board of Anesthesiologists. So welcome, Dr. Conroy. We're excited to have you today.
Thank you, Julie. It's good I have all my degrees in hospital leadership, and because I obviously don't have a technical degree in how to run Zoom
There's a whole new
programs.
Zoom degree that we are required to have now. I totally understand.
Well, I really appreciate being with everybody. And, you know, I have looked at the program. You've had some really impressive speakers, many of whom I recognize are in my group Women of Impact, but I hope I'll be able to contribute to the conversation that you have with your ethics fellows. So great. Why don't I start by sharing my screen? And when we get to the video, we may try to turn my audio microphone off, so maybe people will be able to hear it, but I think we have closed captions, so that should certainly help. All right, great. So I'm going to talk about gender equity and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at Dartmouth Health. I hate to say it, though, that I'm old. Like, I have been around so long that sometimes I wonder why we're still talking about this. And actually, as I was thinking about the equity component and the ethical component of what we're discussing, we're really talking about social ethics when you think about it, because we know that if we don't really leverage women in our workforce and as our leaders, we are ignoring 50% of the talent in this country, probably 51 or 2% now. And I am a little bit shocked that we still have to have this conversation. But it's not just important for us. It's important for our nieces, our nephews, our children, grandchildren that are women, that want to contribute and they want to be treated equitably as they develop their careers, seek their education, and contribute. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of barriers. And the barriers are probably a little bit harder in healthcare than other industries, but we're not the hardest industry to move up the leadership ladder in. And I'm going to talk about a lot of national statistics and talk about what we're doing here at Dartmouth Health. Now I'm going to pause this for a minute and just see if I can actually take off my headset, my microphone, and put my audio back on. Can you hear me now?
Yep,
You can.
it's great.
And were you actually able to hear the clip?
No, but we could watch. It was just as impactful just watching it without as it was with. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, great. So I think it's a Scandinavian company, and it does actually speak to the social ethics between countries, but also there's nothing more endearing than watching the faces of those young boys and girls, and they knew it was wrong. They knew that equal work was performed by the girls. And the thing is, if we can figure that out as kids, why can't we figure that out as adults? Now, this next depiction of women and men being equal, there's a lot of history behind that. I don't know if any of you have actually followed the development of the Equal Rights Amendment, but it was actually written in 1923. 1923, Alice Paul and Crystal Eastman were the authors of the Equal Rights Amendment. And many of you may have known Alice Paul. She was one of the suffragettes for women's right to vote that actually chained herself to the gates of the White House, which was considered treason during World War I. And they were actually jailed. If any of you want to see a very compelling movie, there's one named Iron-Jawed Angels, which is about Alice Paul and her life. And I have given it to every single niece of mine to talk about the importance of the right to vote. But they were the authors of the Equal Rights Amendment, which lay kind of nascent until 1971, when it was resurrected. And it was passed by both the House and the Senate, and then had to be ratified under Article 5 of the Constitution by at least 35 states, and it was ratified. And then a movement headed by Phyllis Schlafly, and I think there's a movie about her life as well, actually started this movement to say that the Equal Rights Amendment was bad for women and shouldn't be passed. And 5 states actually then vetoed their ratification, and it made it unable to actually pass the Equal Rights Amendment across the country for women. And, it's interesting when we talk about the social ethics, it's probably would benefit us to look at the arguments that they had in 1970 and say, how are they really relevant today? They felt they were protecting women, but I think they were focusing on equal rather than equity, which I think as we talk through some of the other pressures that face women in the workplace, to be treated equally is not necessarily to be treated equitably, considering all the unpaid work that women actually do every single day, which speaks more to a conversation about the social equity around a gender equality that we have right now in the context of the current world we live in. Let's see. It doesn't seem like my screen wants to move, so hang on. There we go. So our leadership diversity, we know, and I can't believe we still are asked for studies, that companies with more women executives have a higher shareholder return. Companies with more female directors outperform other companies that don't have female diversity. And the financial performance of companies with at least 3 women on their board have median gains, return on an equity 11% higher. And there's actually a movement to have a minimum of 3 women on every single board, in order to really demonstrate much more broadly that the addition of women in leadership positions on the boards and in the C-suite makes a difference, both financially as well as the organizational culture. In 2014, there was a study of U.S. retail and hospitality in business units that found that gender diverse business units have better financial revenue and net profit outcomes. And again, it's at least one woman on their board outperforming their peer group by 26%. And here at Dartmouth Health, we actually ask our vendors about the diversity of their boards as well as their leadership teams. And it may or may not have anything to do with who we award the contract to, but we feel we need to be informed about their commitment to diversity. We also participate in a group called the Equity Collaborative. And in this collaborative, we actually give our data to McKinsey. And McKinsey is probably one of the leaders in gathering data on gender and gender in the workplace across the country and across multiple industries. And their diversity data, which is incredibly rich, show again that the companies in the top 25% for gender diversity were much more likely to experience above average profitability. So we know they outperform. We know they outperform on gender, and we actually know if you address both gender and ethnic diversity, it just enhances your performance. So it's not just about gender, but it is about gender and race and religion and sexual preference, all the diversity variables that really give you a strong leadership team. Make no mistake, though, this is a war for talent, especially after the pandemic. We know that women make up 57% of the college graduates, and we have to recruit them to our organizations. And one thing that attracts women to organizations are organizations that have effective career ladders and value diversity within their organization. I think COVID led a lot of things, laid a lot of things bare. Certainly our kind of equity in terms of healthcare access, but I think we're seeing a drumbeat about equity in terms of approaching women as our workforce and addressing things that we probably should have addressed years ago: childcare, elder care, all the things that make it much more difficult for women to actually move up the career ladders in their organizations currently. And if you think about it from a pure business perspective, it absolutely makes sense. I mean, women make the majority of the decisions for household spending in their homes. And, somebody told me a story about the company that makes maybe Poise or Always, one of the, feminine pad companies, had a board with absolutely no women on their board, and yet they were making sanitary napkins. And a new CEO came in and totally changed the composition of the board because he said, we really can't relate to and or effectively reach our customers unless we actually understand what they need. And that will not be accomplished with the current board that we have. Now, there are some leadership behaviors that we talk a lot about that you can say are there are some stereotyping, whether or not they're held more by men or by women. I would say in my experience, and I've worked with executives for years across all different backgrounds and across many different institutions, but you cannot gender stereotype who will have what leadership behaviors. Being a role model, developing people, communicating with charisma, those are ones that I think we find in almost every effective leader. Creating a compelling vision of the future, comfortable with corrective actions and setting achieving goals. This gets into a lot of the more kind of tactical aspects of leading. But when we look at the differences across many men and women, we find that women have a much more participatory decision-making process, and men tend to take corrective action and are seen as more decisive when making decisions. You know, it's funny, I think there's a tremendous amount of unconscious bias and gender stereotyping when we assign these leadership traits to individuals. And all of you have participated in search committees and committees evaluating candidates, either in the resume phase and or the Zoom interview and or in-person interview phase. And all of you can appreciate how often our unconscious bias actually affects our perception of, and a lot of time the stereotyping of individuals. I think the reality is that an American dream, that is get a good education and get ahead, does not actually appear to work for women. And there are significant gender pay gaps that exist at every single level. So I think the question is, how big is the problem? It's big. Is it worse in healthcare? It's worse than many other industries. What is getting in our way? I would say it's a lot of the unpaid work that women do, in addition to the unconscious bias that's within our organization. What strategies work? That's why we're joining the Equity Collaborative, so we can actually learn what strategies are effective and other organizations. And I actually believe the University of Chicago is a member as well. And I think the question for all of you is, what are you going to do beginning tomorrow, knowing what you know now? Just getting to the facts, for every dollar earned by a man, 79 cents is earned by women. So actually this translates to close to $500,000 over her level of her career. And women are 2 times more susceptible to changes in firm value than men. What this means is when firms are hitting rocky economic times, women are more often than men asked to go to part-time and or are asked to leave the organization. If you look at what has happened during the pandemic, in April of 2020, we lost 5 million people out of our workforce. From the spring of 2021 to September of 2021, we lost 20 million more people out of the workforce. What is shocking, though, is we have the lowest percentage of women in the workforce now than we've had for 30 years. We know that at least 1.5 million women are out of the workforce simply because of childcare issues alone. When we look at the number of women that actually lost their jobs during some of the early financial challenges of the pandemic, we know that at least twice as many women were affected than men. When we look at the inequity, we know it's not education. In San Francisco, they've been tracking the gender pay gap for many years, and the gender pay gap just increases as you become more educated and, graduate professional degree or physicians have close to a $30,000 pay gap. And it increases as women age. And this is really kind of the maternal wall that women are hitting, age 35 to 55, when they're beginning their families, and in the workplace, they are either passed over or not asked to take on additional roles and responsibilities that would place them under consideration for an increase in compensation. And unfortunately, we know that minority women are specifically affected. Hispanic women, Black and African American women American Indian or Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian women are far below the average compensation for white women, and certainly far below that compared to white men. So it's a double whammy if you're a woman in the workplace and you're a woman of color. And we know that the pay gap has barely budged in a decade, and the pay gap won't close for more than 100 years if we go at the rate that we're going right now. Now I'm going to stop this and see if I can. I certainly wish I could do closed captions, but let me just give you a little bit of a introduction here. This is Jonathan Green, or John Green, and I don't know if you know him, but he's the author of the book, The Fault in Our Stars. He actually started as a young YouTuber, and he and his brother actually create these YouTube educational programs for young adults. And I have to say, this is probably one of the best 9-minute segments of somebody talking about the pay gap. This was presented at the World Economic Forum in 2016. And if you could take one thing out of this presentation, I'd grab this clip by Jonathan Green and show it to everybody you know, because he debunks a lot of the assumptions and a lot of the stereotypes about women in the workplace that people carry around and use to make a lot of their decisions. I am not sure we can do closed captions, so we'll just take it away.
I'm able to share the link to it in the chat, so I can do that for you.
Anyway, now after a lot of reading, I am going to attempt to share what I have learned about the gender pay gap, hopefully without inciting a flame war in the comments. This whole question is fiendishly complex, and people far smarter than I am have spent their whole careers devoted to it, but I want to begin with a broad observation. There is a gender pay gap among full-time workers around the world. But the size of the gender pay gap varies dramatically by country. Like in New Zealand, women working
I think I can hear it very quietly. Maybe I'm hearing it from your computer into your audio.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, but not enough to hear what's going on.
A lot depends on what exactly you're calculating. Like by hourly wage, the pay gap is about 16%. By weekly take-home pay, it's between 18 and 19%. By annual earnings, it's around 21%. The fuzziness here speaks to the complexity of what we're about to get into. But basically, men on average work more hours than women on average. Actually, no, they don't. But men work more paid hours. Right, but so this 16 to 21% number just looks at all full-time workers. It doesn't account for differences in education or skills or experience or occupation. When you factor all that stuff in, the pay gap shrinks to somewhere between 4 and 8%, depending on who's doing the math. This is the so-called unexplained pay gap. That is, there is no economic explanation for it. And most nonpartisan analyses agree that this part of the pay gap is directly due to gender discrimination. By the way, you can find links to lots of sources in the book.
So just to say what he's been talking about, he's talking about the gender pay gap and all of the myths. And he'll go through kind of a process of showing you some graphs about that, but just debunking that the gender pay gap has nothing to do with rank. It has nothing to do with hours worked when you actually consider the unpaid work that women do.
The 8% number might sound low, but even on the extremely conservative end, it would mean that women lose over $241 million of pay every year to direct discrimination. I should add here that there is also a wide racial pay gap in the United States, and as discussed in this Vaughn Brothers video, there is overwhelming evidence that much of that gap is due to direct discrimination. Because race and gender affect people long before they enter the workforce, it's difficult to disentangle causes here, but we do know that women of color are doubly disadvantaged when it comes to pay, regardless of skill level, experience, or education. Right, so a portion of the gender wage gap is attributable to of discrimination in the United States, but most of it is ostensibly about choice of college majors or flexibility when it comes to hours, occupation. And this is what people generally mean when they talk about debunking the gender wage gap. Women on average work fewer hours and tend to work in less lucrative professions, from school teaching to care. Whereas men are more likely to work in higher paying fields like engineering or anesthesiology. And some of the pay gap can be found here. Like in one study, more than 120 professions, more women than men worked in 9 of the 10 lowest paying jobs. But of course, that isn't only about choice. It's also about the expectations of the social order. Like, why are there more female nurse anesthetists, but more male anesthesiologists?
So he's talking actually about the fact that women go into lower paying jobs, and talks about really the social order, that women often select jobs where they're greater impact and value to their communities than men do.
And then there's the fact that even within almost all of these professions, the pay gap persists, from computer programmers to teachers to lawyers. Some of this is the aforementioned unexplained pay gap, but some of it is because men on average work more paid hours than women, which brings us to the question of unpaid work. The average adult American woman spends 167 minutes per day on housework or care for household members. For the average adult American male, it's 101 minutes per day. And
that was the number of unpaid minutes per day people spend at home, and women spend on average 167 minutes per day and men 101. That is the unpaid work.
that work, even though it's unpaid, is of course very real. Now, none of this is to criticize the many women and many men who work fewer hours or don't work in the labor force at all to focus on childcare or housework. It's only to say that women doing a disproportionate amount of the unpaid labor in the United States inevitably distorts the paid labor market. We see this especially clearly in studies of what happens to workers after they have kids. With each child a family has, women see their average income relative to men go down. It goes down about 7.5% after the first child. There have been a ton of studies exploring this, but I just want to highlight one. In 2007, a Stanford professor sent out fictitious resumes to various firms and found that female applicants with children were less likely to be offered positions, and when offered jobs, were offered lower starting salaries. Men, meanwhile, actually seem to fare better after they have children in both employment opportunities and wages. This may also be part of the reason the pay gap gets.
So he identified the fact that after women have their first child, their compensation goes down on average 7.5%. And a Stanford University professor sent out some fictitious resumes and found that women with children were far less often offered an opportunity to interview, and or were, when they were offered jobs, which they were less frequently, they were offered jobs at a lower starting compensation. Actually, let me go back. Oh, I think there we go. Nope, we're done. Okay. So a lot of the reason the pay gap is still unexplained is that understanding the unpaid work, the occupational segregation, is still an imperfect science. The management positions have some of the largest pay differences, and certainly a motherhood penalty for women with children. A lot of stereotypes about working mothers, their ability and or their interest in moving into additional roles. In healthcare, gender equality remains elusive, and it's kind of frightening because 80% of our workforce are women. But when we move into board governance, we have a much smaller percentage of women leaders, hospital CEOs, a much smaller percentage, and CEOs of top 100 hospitals, even a smaller percentage. In the physician workforce, we make up the majority of medical school enrollees, and again, 80% of the healthcare workforce, but a much smaller percent of the leadership. And it also affects division chiefs, deans, and department chairs, authorship in journals, and editor-in-chief responsibilities. The individual challenges are that there is an inequity of opportunity. Very few women compared to men are offered promotion and advancement opportunities. There often are not role models or mentors. We have to confront our conscious and unconscious bias, and they both exist. We spend a lot of time talking about the imposter phenomenon, but it's real for a number of women. There are a lot of family demands, and I deal with a lot of professional partners that have a hard time dealing with who's going to really carry the burden of the family responsibility and who will have the freedom to develop their career. For female physicians of color, the statistics are really discouraging. Only 8% are Asian American, 3% Black African American, 2.5% Hispanic, and American Indian and Native Hawaiian are even lower. We have not made a lot of headway over the years. Academic medicine, women face similar challenges. Department chairs, deans, surgery chairs. And I think what we find is that women enter into academic medicine and often leave. They leave to go into private practice, or they leave to go and pursue other opportunities outside of clinical medicine. We spent a lot of time talking about pay gaps in multiple subspecialties, and I was involved with a presentation with Mary Dale Peterson that was sponsored by the ASA that really talked about the still glaring differences between men and women in terms of their compensation. And when you look at their compensation according to hours worked and rank adjusted, year adjusted time at that rank, the gap still persists. Here are the gender pay gap, and this is what John Green was talking about. If you take it with no controls and then methodically back out hours work, demographics, experience, compensation sources, there still is a significant pay gap that cannot be explained by everything that you decrement from the gap. But if you think about it as a society, you know, when we deprive women of leadership opportunities and full careers that are personally and professionally satisfying, we deprive the United States and the world of their talent, their ingenuity, their innovation, and their efforts. And while some progress has occurred, it really is incredibly slow. A lot of people are content with the status quo. I love this statistic that half of men think that when they just have 1 in 10 senior leaders in a company that's a woman, that's enough. And only a third of women agree with this statement. And I would say that applies to both leadership as well as boards. You know, across our demographics, there are certain groups that are really focused on equity for women. And there are many groups when they look at a woman achieving something in the workplace, they regard it as a takeaway. And there was an interesting study that said most men that are Republican believe that if a woman gets an assignment, a job, an honor, it's a takeaway from a man. And most Democratic men actually see that as additive rather than a takeaway. And those are some societal ethics, societal morals and values that I think we have been grappling with and have not really resolved over the last 100 years. Again, the top 2 barriers are unconscious bias and lack of work-life balance. I think the lack of work-life balance certainly can be associated with the unpaid work that a lot of women do. But let's not ignore unconscious bias. It is still pervasive in our industry. And I would say I see it in 4 different types commonly. Number 1, and I think this Steve Burkow's comment probably speaks to this. The first one is affinity. They're like me. And if they're like me, you know, they would be perfect for this job. There are a number of kind of conclusions like that hiring managers actually use. And that gets in the way of women actually moving into the workplace and moving up in their workplace and having equal opportunity for promotion and important responsibilities that will prepare them as leaders for the future. The second one is kind of a confirmation bias, is when you like somebody, you look out and actually are attracted to data that supports your conclusion that this person is a high performer. And often that's the second iteration of the mini-me. Not only are they like me, but I see a lot of data that actually supports the fact that they're a good leader. The next one is the halo effect. You know, once they do something well, you know, they can't do anything wrong. And the opposite of that is kind of the cloven hoof, where if they do something wrong, they can never do anything right. And how many times in the workplace have you actually seen men and women actually be painted with these kind of stereotypes that affect their ability to truly be successful? I think it's important to remember that it is not an ambition gap. Women in healthcare are just as interested in advancing, but they are less likely to be promoted. And it is not because they do not ask. That's another huge myth. Women ask for promotion. Many of them actually do not get promoted. But what's interesting is people that are promoted without asking, it much more commonly favors men who get promotions without asking, because again, the affinity syndrome, the mini-me, the halo, the confirmation builds up this this image of the individual as a high performer, when in reality, it may not be true. Again, McKinsey and the World Economic Forum have worked together to look at the best practices in bridging the gender gap. And I can tell you that I've worked in organizations for years that I think have really enlightened people, but people still say, well, what about me? Every time I start a women's support group, I get a question about a men's support group. And I'm like, I guess I'm old and I'm getting a little grumpy as I get old. And I'm like, you know what, when women really have equity in the workplace and we have parity at a leadership level, then we can talk about equal opportunity for you. But you've had equal opportunity for 100 years. So there's a lot we have to do to shore up women in the workplace. It's incentives, it's economic opportunity, it's building their capability, it's being sponsors for them, and it's actually creating laws, policies, and regulations that actually support women in the workforce. You know, there are a lot of chronic challenges, and I would say that there present opportunities as well. Limited family leave, you know, we have to expand family leave policies, and we have to look at our own family leave policies and make sure that both our maternity as well as our family medical leave policies are as expansive as they can be. Remember, again, we're in a war for talent, especially in healthcare now. This is the time to examine all of our policies. We need to have innovative leave policies because a lot of the primary caregiver responsibilities fall on women. We've got to look at childcare. I'm thinking about offering free childcare. It is something that is a barrier to women, not only joining the workforce, but actually completely participating in the workforce. And that means late hours, early hours, maybe even 24-hour childcare in order to staff our hospitals and our health system practices that are dying because we don't have enough workers. We've got to review all of our policies. And I can tell you that as we reviewed a lot of our HR policies, we found that if you did not identify a race in our HR system, you were automatically defaulted to white. So I mean, we had to go back in and actually change all of the assumptions that sometimes are invisible to us, but really skew our data when we look at our workforce and try to track our workforce as they move up in their leadership roles. In terms of sexual harassment, we have a no tolerance policy. We just are not going to tolerate it in the workplace. It not only makes women uncomfortable, but it makes men uncomfortable as well. And we've just embraced that. In terms of our gender pay, we do a rank adjusted year at rank comparison every single year to make sure that no woman or man of a person of color actually falls out of a standard deviation for the rank and year at the rank in our organization. And you have to invest and prioritize programs for women, even though I guarantee you somebody will ask you about programs for men. So the business case is clear. The problem is big. It's worse in healthcare. And there are a lot of factors that get in the way. And certainly after COVID, there are even more. But there are strategies that work. And you have to take what you know now to begin the change. I would say you need to examine your leadership team and what roles they play. You should look at your board and you should look at your health system. You have to look at your recruitment process. We started blinding our CVs, so you can't tell sex, you can't tell race. And sometimes that means redacting a lot of the educational opportunities that people take advantage of, especially during the resume review process. And that's when most people get culled out because they don't fit the mold, but they could be a great leader. So you need to be really, really intentional about your recruitment process so you can actually allow really talented candidates to surface. You have to prioritize respect, and this respect for everybody. And I would say organizations, especially during COVID, had forgotten what it means to really be respectful of everyone within the organization. We spent the last 3 years being angry, and we have to get back to kindness and respect. And you have to create visibility, recognition, and a seat at the table. We have changed all of our medical executive committees, all our leadership committees, not only to have women, but to have all health professions represented, and to make sure that we represent people from a diverse background as well as gender in every single one of our leadership groups. So I know there's a little bumpy because of the technical issues, but I'm going to stop sharing and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Great. So there's already one question in the chat, which I'll read in a second, but thank you so much for your presentation and your perspective. We really appreciate that. I had a question because this has come up a lot, and we've in discussions and leadership discussions we've had is how to make sure that these policies for recruitment and making sure it's balanced can be making sure that we're looking at it equitably, but also not hindering a nimble recruitment process. Having so many rules in place to make sure that there's enough women, enough diversity, that then we don't make offers, a couple months later than like the other people. So I don't know if you've struggled with that balance at all.
So when we use a search firm, we tell them they have to have a diverse candidate pool. That's a #1 requirement. The second thing is, we have some specific expectations that there should be 2 women, 2 people of color in every single kind of final slate of people that get Zoom interviews. We do like to be informed about the market. I can tell you that we had a psychiatry search that's currently underway. We did not get 1 candidate of color and not 1 woman. And we went out into the marketplace and people said, yeah, that's a pipeline problem for us in psychiatry across the country. I think we have to be more aggressive and intentional, though, about reaching out. Now, I can tell you that I mentor a lot of women, and women but men as well sometimes don't want to move. And they do not put their names in the hat because they have, a too professional family, and it's incredibly difficult to move your family. And so they don't ever throw their names in the hat. I think we just all need to encourage women to look, because number one, they'll learn a lot about their own value, and certainly their value at their own organization. So they should look, but they might change their mind. They might see something out there that they really like and decide to make that move, either to move their family or, my head of DEIB, her husband runs a hospital now in Florida, and they're from Arizona. And we are just making it work because she is talented enough that I'm willing to do a 5 days a month that she's here and working remote the rest of the time. And I think employers are starting to think about how creative can we get. Harder for a leadership position of a medical school or a teaching hospital. I get it. But there are many positions that we can actually really get creative around hybrid work schedules.
Wonderful. Dr. Royer, Dean of Medical Education, who co-leads the series with me, joined. She had to be a little late because of her medical school responsibilities. I don't know if any of you had a question, then I can move to the questions in the chat.
Yeah,
Hi,
no,
Vinny.
hi, it's great to see you. And don't worry about technical difficulty. We all have some. I was explaining some to our students, in fact, at the 12 hour. I actually wanted to follow up on the mentoring, because that was my question, actually, given how many women, and especially women of color and diverse individuals that you've mentored, especially most recently. I think that there is a lot of discussion here about sort of the we sense the need for change, and we want to be part of the change, and we have great leaders who are leading initiatives like this, like Julie and others in surgery and in pediatrics. But then at the end of the day, especially for women of color, there's that mentoring tax then that cascades down to, just yesterday at our meeting, we approved a new women in surgery interest group for the students. And so how do you think about protecting people and advising people on how to say yes or no earlier in their career, around taking on new roles? Because what I've seen is a little bit of a shift in the pandemic. But I wonder, are people going to lose an opportunity because they said no? Or how can you coach people to the right opportunity, if you will?
Yeah. So I mentor a lot of women, and I'm usually active mentoring, we meet every single month, and it goes for about a year, but I mentor a lot of women beyond that period of time. I would say that I tell women to say yes far more than many other people. I tell them to say yes with certain kind of characteristics. Number one, whatever they're being asked to do, it needs to be something that they can meaningfully contribute to, and not just warm a seat, not just check a box. So it should be something that they feel they can make a contribution to. The second thing is it should be something that helps them, that helps their career, and actually looks good on their resume. And if it doesn't meet those two criteria, they have to really decide whether or not it's worth it. Women, when we really started a kind of our quality journey in the late 90s, I can tell you every single quality program in every single department where I was in South Carolina was led by a woman. So because it wasn't felt to necessarily be a great plum to have on your CV to be head of quality for the anesthesia department. So now it's a little bit more of a accolade, especially if you can actually create an impact. But back then it wasn't. It was just like another kind of task that you had to do. So I think people really need to be thoughtful about that. I'll give you an example. I was asked to be on a strategic planning committee in 1994 at the Medical University of South Carolina. What a surprise. There were 6 subgroups, and what did I get? Diversity. What a surprise. But what I did is I went out and I did a rank adjusted, year adjusted at that rank, analysis of compensation across the entire university. And where we identified women that were actually 2 standard deviations below the average of that, according to their specialty. I mean, it was shocking. And actually I presented it to the strategic planning committee, and I think their jaws probably dropped, because I don't think they expected that, and I probably didn't do a really good job messaging that ahead of time. But I have to say, I mean, it was really excellent data. And what they did is they then actually addressed the pay gap for those women, and not only brought them up, but I think they actually paid them some back pay. It was something that they had no idea, because they actually had never done the analysis. And I think that started me on my journey of doing some hard stuff. Like, I did that on weekends at home, on the floor, in the basement, looking at spreadsheets and, manually doing everything, but it had a real impact on the organization. So I would say, those are the 2 things that women need to kind of think about. I don't always say, how much time do I have? Because frankly, if it's something you're really passionate about, like, you'll find the time and it will give you joy to do it. Like, I love mentoring. So I know it's like extra hours on my calendar, but you know what? I get more than I give when I mentor women. And I learn a ton of stuff from them, and I become a better leader because I'm mentoring them. And so there are so many kind of intangibles that you get from something you really love.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we have one great question that's from our fellows, and we're going to spend a little extra time with them after. So we're going to promote them to panelists after we finish this. So I'm going to save that amazing question for then. We had one person comment on they would have been interested in the psychiatry opportunity. And then the next one I'll just read is, any thoughts on how to make women support each other? Women are generally harder on women in leadership. And I think this comment goes on from the same anonymous person. For women, this gets so much worse the more the gray hair shows, like maybe more senior women. Women are harder on more senior women, I think, is the implication. So I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, a female psychiatrist told me a long time ago, never let your hair go gray. But I'm living in like Birkenstock world up here, where everybody lets their hair go gray. So my hair is not this color. And that is actually purposeful. Yeah, I do believe that people I know some women with beautiful gray and white hair, and they just are kind of gorgeous. But there is a little bit of a stereotype. When women have gray hair, they say you're too old to do the job. And when men have gray hair, they say you're distinguished. I mean, our society is filled with kind of all of these stereotypes. In terms of women being harder on women, there is a phenomenon, and we see it a lot in healthcare because of nurses and female physicians, that women a lot of times relate to each other based on relationships. And I do remember as a resident, it was really important to establish a relationship with the charge nurse running the floor that I was working on. And you're not trying to be their friend, but you are acknowledging them, and you are, I treat them as a partner. And that was really important. And if I did see some female surgeons kind of trying to do the hierarchy thing with nurses, and man, that does not work. I mean, those nurses are very powerful in an academic medical center. They know their stuff if they've been there and have a lot of experience and know how the organization works. So you need to make sure that they're your partner. I would say that they do treat female physicians. We talked about this just last week. Some of the female nurses are harder on their female residents than they are on their male residents. They're harder. And they really, they want that relationship, and they don't actually demand it from the male residents. And I don't have a fix for that. I think that it does occur. And I think just kind of thinking about how you create a partnership is really important. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, great. So there's a few more like, yeah, we were talking, it's just this conversation about gray hair. And so I think we'll leave that at that. And then maybe I will ask the fellows last question. You can answer it here and then we'll stop recording and ask them to come on camera. So these 5 ethics fellows who were sitting in a room together said, wonderful talk, wondering about the study showing better performance with more diverse teams or boards. Did that hold true for teams or boards that were primarily women, performed more poorly than the more diverse teams, or was it really only for the men heavy teams?
Oh yeah, that's a really great question. You know what, I'm not going to answer that until I go get the data, but I will get the data on that. I think diversity is good for everybody. Like if you had an all-female team, you know what, you probably need some men on that team. And I've got to believe that it's really just diversity writ large, you know, regardless of if it starts all male or starts all female, your teams will just perform better when you have a diverse leadership group. But you know what, we have proven that over and over and over again. I mean, if anybody asks to do another study, I think my head will explode because we've been doing studies for 15 years and there's been tons of evidence in Fortune 500, Fortune 100, Fortune 50. We know when you have a diverse leadership team that you just make better decisions. So.
Wonderful. Great. So I think with that, we'll stop the recording. Thank you for everybody for participating in today's talk. As a reminder, next Wednesday, Dr. Peak will be joining us. She's one of our internal speakers talking about basically racial justice and gender equity. So thank you to all of our participants. If you're one of our ethics fellows, if you could please stay on and we will promote you to a panelist so that you can participate in a more intimate conversation with Dr. Conroy for the next 15-20 minutes. So we'll just give a second for that to happen and for the recording to stop. And then we'll promote them.